Before we begin, I would like to say that this is the second part of my review on World of Warcraft Classic. If you would like to see my thoughts on the first 10 levels of the game, be sure to check out part 1 of the World of Warcraft Classic review. As a reminder, I have never played any version of WoW before, so this review is aimed at people who have never touched the game before, but were wondering if it holds up to today's standards. This section will cover my game time from levels 10 to level 18, a span of time that lasted me probably about 8 hours, I would guess. At the end of my last review for WoW, I had just gained the ability to tame Beast, as the class I had chosen was Hunter. This new ability quickly became my favorite in the current status of my game. My pet I had tamed was a Strigid Owl I named Screechinor. He was a couple of levels below me, but the impact he made on my combat was instant, immediately doubling my damage output and making grinding for quest items that much quicker and more tolerable. Pets will put out a certain percentage of their normal damage depending on how much food you give them. If they are unhappy, they put out 75%, but if they are happy, they will put out 125% of their normal output. Where I am now, I am not sure if this expands or not. Regardless, I'm always ecstatic to have a pet partner by my side. Having the extra firepower has made me a little overconfident at times. I died a couple times from getting into fights with multiple enemies that would end up with me or Screechinor dying, and it's just another example, like in the first part of this review, where I really need to learn to be more aware of the environment and pick my battles carefully. If your pet dies, you have a spell that will resurrect them at 15% health, and you will need to feed them again. If you get too far from your pet, but it hasn't died, there is another ability to instantly call it to your side. Once you tame your pet, it is yours for however long you want it, that is, unless you lose its loyalty by not feeding it. Finding food for a Strigid Owl seemed next to impossible for me, and I ended up losing him. I would later tame a crab named Krabby Pants, and he has been my partner ever since. While we are on the topic of how exactly the pets operate, as of now, my pet does not have any abilities of its own, but I am curious to find out if there are some available. The limited commands you have for your pet is to follow you, stay, or attack, while the tendency of the pet can be set to aggressive, defensive, or passive. Should you choose defensive, they will only attack enemies that attack you or them. Aggressive, on the other hand, can go a little overboard with its aggression. When I first set it to this, I figured he would attack enemies in my path. Instead, he completely runs off course of where I am going to fight someone off screen. It's no big deal really, because you can easily set him to passive or defensive and he'll come back, but it can be annoying for what I want during a mission, where I have to take down specific enemies and my pet starts attacking the wrong thing. After what seemed like forever, I finally got a chance to leave the island of the Night Elves and travel towards the mainline area. This unlocked a new shop that trains hippogriffs, whose sole purpose is to transport you to towns you have already visited and talk to the hippogriff masters of. While I very much appreciate having this travel ability, once you get on the hippogriff, you are stuck waiting on it until it delivers you to your destination. No quick loading screen like a fast travel, and it's just all real-time travel. Kind of pointless when all you are flying over is an empty sea, but luckily the first flight takes only about a minute or so, I would guess. It's not too outrageous, but it still takes you out of the game for a prolonged period of time. In my time in Aberdeen, the first village I arrive at when coming to the mainland, I instantly noticed how much different it was from the Night Elf land. Everything has a much darker tone to it. It's a fishing colony with different creatures than anything I had fought before to this point. Arriving also allowed me to pick up a bundle of new quests that will involve more grinding and waiting. One thing I really need to give WoW Classic some credit for is how beautiful it looks for such an old game. Maybe it's because of my growing up with games in the late 90s, early 2000s, but I am constantly being drawn into the environments and the character design of everything in the game so far. While the gameplay side of things have been mostly disappointing to me so far, the game looks great. The NPCs populate a world that feels believable in a fantasy sense, and I am 100% for this aesthetic. At this point, I would say I'm closing in on about 14 to 16 hours of game time overall, and you would expect when leaving the tutorial section that things would pick up in pace. However, with the kind of missions that WoW provides, it almost feels like the game has slowed down for me. Most missions are the same thing you deal with in the tutorial section. The quest giver will pinpoint an enemy type that holds a specific item you need to gather. You'll be taking down multiple of the same enemy, hoping that the RNG will work in your favor, but usually it doesn't because the drop rates are just awful in this game. My early missions had me passing by wild creatures and would often end in me being mauled to death by a bear or being ganged up on by a Tauren-like creature. Even swimming in the water proved to be a dangerous task, as a sea monster would quickly take out my pet and me almost every single time. Everything in this new area was overwhelming and seemed out of my league. It was time to start grinding levels so I could begin the progress. Everything I had done in the mainland to this point was met with death. One of these deaths resulted in me spawning in an area I had not even traveled to yet, which was odd. I was level 11 at the time, fighting level to 13, 14 enemies where I died, but the new area that it had teleported me to was filled with level 18 beasts roaming around. Regardless, this made for a frustrating experience of trying to return to a safer area when walking in any direction would attract more enemies to me. Eventually, I find it made it to the area I was at before. The tougher enemies were not the only frustration I had to deal with. While I had a similar issue during my time in the first part of the review, I had a couple times where my quest giver would completely just disappear. It was very annoying having to deal with my access for more experience not being available when that experience was sorely what I needed to progress. Before, this issue did not affect me too much. Only a couple of quests could not be redeemed in the tutorial land, but this was beginning to feel too common for my taste. Just as a side note here, I have found out the issues I was having. The quest givers were no longer being pointed out with a question mark above their head like normal, but the questy add-on helped point them out to me. No idea why this was happening, but it just happened. I still recommend getting the questy add-on because it is such a good add-on for this game. Another bug I eventually started running into was while my pet was set to aggressive, he would stop moving after defeating an enemy. Moving him to defensive would get him moving again, but outside of that, he was constantly getting stuck on corpses. After what felt like a few hours of grinding lower level enemies to give myself a chance to survive, I finally was able to handle some of the missions in the new area. However, even after putting time into ensuring that I was a higher level, I always feel like I am underpowered. I am not sure if my equipment is the reason or what, but I am still failing very regularly. It is more frustrating because every shopkeeper I talk to does not have new weapons that I can buy. Everything is beyond my proficiency, and the game has yet explained any way for me to be able to acquire these, at least at this point. At the time of making this video, I'm at level 18, and I've been using the same dagger since I was around level 12 because I cannot find any other weapons to use with it besides my bow. Armor, on the other hand, I find in almost every other mission. Most of the time it's a reward for completing a quest, and sometimes it even will drop with random enemies, but I have yet to find a single drop for any weapons that I can actually use. I mostly think the stem of my problems come from trying too hard to play WoW solo. The longer I play, the more it is nailed home to me that this is meant to be a party game. I have had a few good experiences with random players inviting me to parties, but there never seems to be anything where anyone wants to stick around long term. This is fine, but it's unfortunate for me. Partying up is great in a populated area, but too often you'll be pursuing a quest in the middle of nowhere with no one available to help you. It puts me in a situation where I feel I am constantly hitting my head against the wall. I go in alone, I die, repeat. I just have to hope that the next time I get lucky enough for someone to walk by that I can ask for help. 18 levels and getting close to about 15 hours of gameplay, and I am at 18 levels and I'm probably getting close to about 15 hours of gameplay, and it has yet to evolve for me. The only upgrades from my skills so far have been incremental bonuses to the damage of the abilities I already have. I'm not learning any new things, and I feel like I am barely, if at all, improving myself with the many enemies I take out. This adds even more to the slow nature of how the world expands. I figured when I left the starting island for the Night Elves that I would be seeing many new places and going in exciting new quests. So far, in the new area of Darkshore, where I have spent at least 6 hours or so in, I have found 2 towns with about a 10-minute walk in between them, and that's if you do not fight any enemies in between the towns. In that long walk, you only see wooded area with the same bear and wildcat enemies. For a quicker travel, you can use the hippogriffs, but you're still waiting quite a while before you are given control again. The previous 2 paragraphs perfectly encapsulate my frustrations with World of Warcraft Classic. It's slow, it's too big for its own good, it's not very rewarding, It's not interesting, and worst of all, it's boring at its worst moments. It is for these same reasons that I cannot in good consciousness recommend this game to anyone within the first 18 levels of the game. Until I get to the point where playing feels worth the time investment, there's no way I can recommend a subscription for any new player to play WoW Classic, unless you go in purely to see how things used to be. Simply put, I'm not having a great time playing the game, as of yet. My final review for World of Warcraft Classic levels 10 through 18 is 4 out of 10.